What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another Buzz Beat. We are recording this following the Hornets' 14th game of the season, having just played the Wizards the day before Thanksgiving, winning 117-114 at home. I think they've already played the Wizards 3 times this season, which is interesting. This is Richie. I'll be joined by Darian here, Trust the Buzz, his YouTube channel, for a quick recap. We are also live on YouTube, Spaces, and if there are any questions that come up in the chat, we can get to those as well. Lastly, as we get into this, we wanted to make sure if you haven't given us a review on Apple Podcasts, we'd appreciate it because it helps us get noticed even more. So, Darian, thanks for joining again. I believe this is your third appearance.
Yeah, I think so. I'm glad to be here. Anytime you ask me to get on, I'm more than happy to get on. So I'm glad to be back.
Yes, there's not many people that have been on our show 3 times. There's been people that have been on once, twice, but three's a different category.
I like it. Upper echelon, I guess.
That's right. Let me ask you a quick question because we are in the Thanksgiving holiday spirit here. If you were to choose 3 things that need to be on your plate for Thanksgiving, and those 3 had to be on the plate regardless of whatever else comes. I know there's probably 4, 5, 6 things on your plate, but choose the top 3. Choose the top 3.
Turkey. I gotta be traditional. I love the turkey.
Okay.
Uh, Mac and cheese. Mac and cheese is a staple. It's just it's good, and I normally don't eat a lot of it throughout the year, so that's why you know, having it at Thanksgiving is the best. And
Could be a
probably like
dessert.
dressing with gravy
Okay.
is another one. That one, yeah, that's probably my third one. Those I always have to get, no matter where I'm at, no matter my family, friends, family, wife's family. Those are the three I always look for.
Yeah, that's funny because those would have been the 3 that I said. I call it stuffing, dressing, whatever you wanna call it, but,
Yeah.
yeah, those are the 3 that are always a staple on my plate. Alright, so let's get into this game recap. The Hornets did end up winning. You probably wouldn't have felt that if you watched the first half. They were down at half. There was actually a half-court shot that did not come back to bite them, in the butt, but that would have been funny if they did lose by 3, having that been the Kispert 3 before halftime. But 117-114. Miles Bridges finished with 33 points, 11 rebounds. LaMelo Ball finished with 34 points, 8 rebounds, 13 assists. And then for the Washington side, Kuzma and I think Gafford were probably the biggest players, the biggest components for them to kind of keep them in the game. Hornets struggled offensively, a lot of clogged lanes in the first and second quarters. And it really was LaMelo in the first half that kind of kept that energy, especially at the beginning of the second quarter. But I do think that the lack of perimeter shooting on this team, affects this team in so many different ways. There's a lot of like standing around late in shot clock situations, a lot of like drive, kick out to somebody, that person pumps, they drive, they kick out to somebody, and it's really like LaMelo and Miles consistently putting that rim pressure. I actually thought Mark Williams, we'll get to him a little bit later, but I don't think he was that big of a factor in the first half or even like the first 3 quarters. It felt like his impact was very inconsistent. And I think, maybe some of the foul trouble, hurt him as well. But it didn't feel like he was having that big of an impact. And some of the things that he was doing felt a little bit neutralized by Washington. And I thought the Hornets would come out, in the second half with a little bit more energy. I get it. It's the day before Thanksgiving. I don't think they're playing again until Sunday. And it's a team that they should beat. But when you come off this high from Boston, you win this game, it almost felt like the Hornets could just walk through this game, and they did eventually win, and it wasn't pretty, but for the longest time, Darian, I did not think they were gonna win this game.
Yeah, I didn't either. I was really confused, just didn't understand. We've seen, and this isn't anything new. We've seen it last 3 or 4 years, where the Hornets just take teams easy. They just kind of think they can coast through, like you said. This is also situational. That's something I didn't think about until you said it about Thanksgiving's coming up. You don't play till Sunday, and that's the beginning of a road trip. Final game of the home game stand. It all makes sense situationally why this game was the way it was. But for a team like us, where we need every single win we can get, it's important for us to win this game. And I'm glad, and I think they knew that, but I also don't think they thought that the Wizards would come out the way they did. So I believe that played a part in it as well. And like you said, this was very reminiscent, in my opinion, of the way the Boston game kind of went, where the Mellow keeps you afloat. He keeps you in the game. And then kind of towards the end, and as you mentioned, like with Mark Williams, Miles Bridges too, Brandon Miller hit a clutch shot. Like the other guys starting to pick up, like right at the peak of the game. All right, when when Lamelo's probably gassed. And I'm not saying he doesn't have any more left in him, because we know Lamelo will pull energy out of anywhere. But when Lamelo's kind of gassed, the other guys really stepped up at the end there, and that I thought, like I said, very reminiscent of the Boston game.
Yeah, exactly. And I almost feel like you could argue that LaMelo Ball in the past 5 games has been top 5, top 10 NBA player,
No,
just
for
in these,
sure.
5 to 8 games. Like, and it's funny, a lot of these younger guards are playing really well right now. Halliburton, SGA, De'Aaron Fox, but those teams have a better support system around them. Ball is like the top of the list of the game plan. So he heads into these games knowing that a lot of the focus and the attention is going to be, hey, let's stop Ball, and then the other 4 guys will have a more difficult time. But heading into this game, I looked this up before we got on here. The last 5 games for Ball, he's shooting 41% on above the break threes, 67% on corner threes, and 63% in the restricted area in those last 5 games. And we saw a little bit of everything tonight with his floater game, his push shot, his step back three, his passing was awesome. I think I've noticed one thing. I don't know if I tweeted this or not, but he does a good job of passing and cutting when he picks up his dribble from 3, because opponents close out hard on him, knowing that is a very good 3-point shooter. And so when that closeout comes, he makes that immediate pass to the big, and then he goes directly to the rim. And that happened a couple times where it led to points because the opponent is kind of going the opposite direction while his momentum is taking him towards the hoop. So he was huge tonight. Step back 3, a nice little pass to JT Thor, who was,
That was a great pass.
yeah, that was one of the better passes of the game. And then one thing I just wanted to highlight before I pass it back to you about LaMelo,
Mhm.
and I mentioned this about Mark. Like, Mark wasn't all that involved until the fourth quarter, and him and Ball had a 2-man game a lot in that fourth quarter. They spammed that pick and roll back to back to back and tried to get Mark involved. Mark didn't get his first dunk until the fourth quarter. But I say this because they were doing this late in the game, and there was this one play that I wanted to highlight where he got an empty side pick and roll on the right side of the court with Mark Williams, and you're expecting him to use the screen, but he rejects it, goes baseline. The baseline's wide open, and then you have that Miles Bridges cut. He kind of fumbled the ball,
Mhm.
right? It could have been a cleaner dunk, but that was a clutch pass and a clutch play. And for LaMelo to recognize, hey, I'm using Mark's screen over and over again. How about I reject this, go baseline where there's not as much help, and then when the help does come, he found Miles Bridges. So yeah, I would make the case that he's been a top 10 guy over the past 5 games.
Yeah, and I don't anyone that would argue against you has not been watching him, because he has just been phenomenal, especially as people who have watched LaMelo go from year 1 to year 4. This is what we thought we would see. We were like, once LaMelo puts it all together, he can be an entire offense by himself. And I think there's still some stuff left. Of course, every basketball player is always improving. There's still some stuff left to kind of between him and that, just like that upper echelon where it's like this guy literally can't be stopped. He still has a little ways to go there, but I mean, it's closer than ever, I feel like. And the fact that he is so young, reaching that kind of level, because we're talking about the level he's playing at now at the age is like that's a guy's peak at 27, 28. So it does make me kind of wonder into the future, like if he's doing this now, Imagine what it's going to be like then when it's just a little more refined. Hopefully, better teammates. He's just playing out his mind, and I think he's able to just affect the game in so many ways, and he's taking advantage of that. Because like, I'll at least go to the first 3 seasons. He was very like, okay, if he's not scoring, he has like 10 plus assists. If the playmaking, if the offense in general is a little shaky, he has like 11, 12 rebounds. This year, we even saw when he was struggling, he is able to impact the game in other ways on offense outside of like shooting and passing. Similar to what you're saying, just the cuts, the drives to the rim. Because yes, you weren't making them, but the consistency of doing that over and over again, we've seen that it's created a lot of space for others. Bryce McGowan's was, a benefactor of that today. JT Thor had a few chances and had a few chances all season, really, to kind of be a benefactor of that. So if we can get other guys to hit shots and LaMelo continues to do what he does, I don't see how it's going to be easy to stop him because now if he's not scoring, then just hit the now I think he's reaching that point where just the threat of him is good enough to where it's going to keep other teams honest and still open up the game for others. As far as him not hitting though, I don't know. He's got to slow down at some point, but it doesn't look like it's going to be anytime soon. He just looks like he's in another zone. The little floater, like you mentioned, the just attacks of at the basket, the ability to kick out, the three. I've seen him catching in this game alone. We saw the catch and shoot. We saw the step back. We saw the where he's just kind of holding it for a little bit. The offense really doesn't materialize, and he just chucks it up and it goes in. Like we've seen it from all levels, and he's just on really like another zone right now.
He's such an unconventional player. I think a lot of times it's hard to kind of gauge like, man, he's taking these weird one-footed floaters. He's doing things that not a lot of people see. So when he does try something that not a lot of players would try and it ends up in a mistake, I think sometimes we kind of shake our heads a little bit more, but the positives like totally outweigh the negatives. And I think in this game specifically, just wanted to point this out. When you break down by quarter the points, he was fairly consistent over the 4 quarters. And like I said, he was one of the few guys in the first half that kind of kept them afloat. I'll
Mhm.
use your term there. But he had his most points in the fourth quarter, 12 points, 4 of 7. I'm not sorry, 4 rebounds, 7 assists, 4 of 9 shooting. But 2 big free throws late. The Hornets did not shoot the
Mhm.
ball particularly well from the charity stripe, 71%. But he hit 2 late in this game to kind of come up big and clutch. I will pass it to you, Darian. Which player do you want to talk about, or which players would you like to talk about next?
Oh man, let's talk about.
Could be good or bad.
Oh man, let's talk because I think me and you are the only two people, at least I see, who are kind of high on this player, especially as of late. Let's talk about Bryce McGowan's.
Okay. Yeah. So Bryce McGowan's a guy that his 3 point shot has not been falling for the most part, but in today's game it was. And I think one thing that I did note on Twitter the other day in the Boston game, where his box score looked pretty poor, but I thought it was a little bit deceiving. I mean, obviously, he didn't have a great game in Boston, but some of the little things that I saw that he did defensively and just kind of competing on that end, you're seeing little jumps here and there. I think he's a guy that obviously probably is better as a straight line driver, getting to the rim. He's aggressive in that way, but he definitely benefited from Lamelo in this game. I think he had 3 3 pointers, and I think
Hmm.
2 of them were assisted from Lamelo. I think both of those coming in the first half. And I made a point. This kind of goes hand in hand with Gordon Hayward, who had an awful shooting.
Awful game. That's who I was going to mention next.
And I am probably, one of, if not the biggest proponent of Gordon Hayward on Hornets community Twitter. But I will even admit that I don't think that he should have been playing that much in the fourth quarter. He did close the game out for the Hornets, but I almost wish it would have been Bryce, and because Bryce was feeling it. And I'll have to look up his stat line, but those 3 pointers that he makes, hopefully that kind of builds his confidence moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. So like I have it right here. He had 13 points, 1 steal, 1 block, 3 rebounds. Was 4 or 5 from the field, 3 or 4 from three, and 2 of 2 from the free throw line. So he had a pretty solid game, and like you said, I just the only reason I said I want to talk about it is just because he's doing a lot of the small things that at the at the beginning of the season we really want Cody Martin to do.
Mhm.
Um, and if we can get Bryce McGowan to do that, as far as like a team building standpoint, I think that helps out a lot. Considering we just paid Cody Martin, and I know he comes off the books and like at some point, but if Bryce McGowan can pick up that role, I think that would help this team significantly. You won't be able to rely on him because he's just now kind of getting like good, reliable, solid minutes. If this continues, I will have to see like what happens when we get everyone healthy. But if he can kind of provide this, I think it's going to be very beneficial for the team. You have another guy that can kind of handle the ball. I'm not going to look for him to play make or lead the offense, but he can at least handle it on his own for a little bit in certain plays. And then also he can hit the three, but like you said, also a point of dribble penetration. He does a good job of that. That's kind of his bread and butter. And if you look at his film, I know it's going far back now, but if you look at his film from Nebraska, he was just very creative at doing that. And right now, we only have LaMelo and Miles who are like very effective at it. If we can add like other people to that, I, right now, I don't know how. Like you can't. I don't know how the three ball is just going to start falling. So I feel as though the best thing we can do is create the space. So the more people we can get a little more comfortable attacking the basket, maybe that will help because I think the only real way we can help is by trade or something like that. And I just don't. I'm not going to sit here and wait for that to happen. So yeah, Bryce McGowan, I think he just had a pretty good game, pretty solid game. Um, and it did suck that did not see him close, but his defense I thought was really, really good. I thought he played aggressive. I thought, he did a good job of keeping up who we need to keep up with. He didn't get confused too many times where he's ball watching or rotate over to the wrong person. I think he just played a good active game. And based on where our bench is right now, that's really all we can ask for. So I just really want to give him credit because I normally am not too high on the bench. So the fact that we had a bench player actually play decent, felt like I just had to say something.
Yeah, because this wasn't like an Ish Smith game. He didn't really have a game. JT
Yeah.
Thor hit like a three-pointer early in the game, but other than
Mhm.
that, like maybe his rebounding was all right, but Bryce McGowan's was the guy off the bench in this game. And obviously the Hornets were limited because PJ Washington, we had learned the news that he was going to be absent for this game with an injury. That was kind of a shock last minute kind of announcement there. So the team kind of shrunk in terms of which players could have been used. And it's funny,
Mhm.
Bryce McGowan's and Gordon Hayward are not only connected because I thought Bryce should have played over Gordon, but they actually did some like summer workouts together. And
Mhm.
it's funny. It's almost like Gordon is mentoring Bryce. I don't feel like they're like all that similar of players, but they have some similarities. And for Gordon, just I don't know if it was like 25% that he shot. I think he only made 2 dunks in the third quarter, where like it
Mhm.
tried to ignite some energy to come back. And I think it was like back to back possessions as well. But Clifford did. Speaking of defense, Clifford did praise Hayward's defense a ton against Boston. And I thought, especially early on with Hayward, it was good again to start the game. And I think his physicality and his ability to be around players, kind of like Bryce McGowan just has the ability to be around players, goes a long way. I think sometimes when players evaluate or when people evaluate players on the defensive side of the court, you can't look at the end product. You can't look at the
Mhm.
basket, the ball going through the basket. I think if you can test shots, you're around the ball. Um, you're with your rotations and stuff like that. I think that is a better way to judge someone on that end. And I think Hayward and McGowan's, to your point, both did that in this game, even though Hayward was god awful. So, um, the only other two players that I would like to mention is Mark Williams and Miles Bridges.
Mhm.
Miles Bridges, obviously, what is it? What game number is this for him? 4.
4? Yeah, and he's back, like, he's full form, it seems like he just
Yeah. It's funny, it's very awkward to talk about him, but, like, strictly
Yeah,
as a basketball player,
right.
he's on the team, so we've gotta talk about him. He
Mhm.
started off slow, like, he missed a bunny,
He did. Mhm.
real early in the game, cold start, but he was able to get to double digits by halftime, And he's one of the few guys on this roster that it feels like he adheres to Borrego's like old philosophies. You're either getting to the rim or you're shooting threes. And he's
Mhm.
also one of the few guys that has the ability to do that, like off the dribble. He can shoot the ball off the dribble from behind the arc, which many players on this roster do not have that ability. And he's one of
Not
the
at
few
all.
players that can get to the rim. Bully ball, Euro steps. He can finish with either hand, acrobatic finishes. He had this nice and one finish in the beginning of the second half.
Mhm.
And he had really good clutch plays like LaMelo, where, yeah, I'm sure you remember this, where he stole the ball from Jordan Poole kind of around like mid
Oh, yeah, when it was getting, like, tipped around and
yeah,
stuff, yeah.
he missed the free throw, but he drew the n one there. And then I think on the next possession, he had a step back three with
Yeah.
5 seconds left to create that 3-point cushion. So he's a guy that obviously on the court allows the Hornets to do some things that they weren't previously allowed to do. He's an undersized center at times. I think him and JT Thor kind of like oscillate between the
Yeah.
4 or 5. To me, I think
Mhm.
I think Miles Bridges, like if both of those guys are on the court, I think Miles Bridges is it's probably semantics, but he's the 5. He's the guy that can
For
kind of
sure, I
yeah,
would rather him, kinda be the 5. So, yeah, for sure.
yeah. But yeah, I just wanted to get that in about Bridges. Obviously, the whole situation is just very awkward and weird to talk about. But he was either the best player or the second best player tonight.
For sure, yeah. I mean, there's not a lot he can't do on the floor. I think his defenses looked pretty good. We saw him being put on Giannis in the Bucks game. And he kind of switches around. I think playing him at the 5, kind of how we have to do, it allows us, like you said, to do things that we normally can't do. But being able to have that athletic 5, because we saw at times the Wizards, and even in the second time we played them, we saw them try to go back to the 5 out that killed us that very first game. And so being able to put Miles at the 5, JT Thor at the 4, because JT Thor at least can stand there, so at least that helps a little bit. So allowing Miles at the 5, allows him to kind of pick up any pick and roll, and just make it very switchable, which is what I mean, not the Warriors, the Wizards are trying to do, is get preferable matchups. But with Miles out there at the 5, and like I said, JT Thor as well, it's going to be hard to kind of get a preferable matchup, unless you're just really attacking LaMelo. But we saw, kind of towards the end of this game, LaMelo's playing really good active defense as well, just sliding his feet, making sure no one gets past him. But yeah, Miles Bridges, I think he's just going to be a huge component of his team. I'm noticing he didn't have any assists, which that's
Yeah,
kind of been one of his underrated things, in my opinion. Even before he left, was that he's actually a really good passer. So him not getting an assist, I don't think that is he was playing like selfish ball or anything, but it just jumped out at me just because of the fact that he is so good at passing. But there was a lot of times, Miles was on the floor and there was no LaMelo, so Miles just kind of had to make something work. I think that's he got a little groove there too. That's how he got a few of his points. So yeah, he's just going to be the double digit rebounds again. He's just going to be a huge component. He's going to be a huge component because he allows us to actually be versatile. Because we have a lot of versatile guys on our team, but very few excel at really being versatile. He's one of the few that I feel as though it really doesn't matter where you put him. He's gonna make the most of that, and most of the time it's a mismatch.
to your point, it's almost like he and LaMelo cannot be sitting at the same time because
Mhm.
of the fact that they can make things happen with the ball in their hands. And he is playing a ton of minutes, like, rust or like getting into game shape. Like Clifford's like, no, you're playing in 35, 36, 37 minutes a game. Come on and let's do this. I don't know how many, I feel like he played like 40 plus minutes. I mean, it was overtime game, but he played like 40 plus minutes against the Celtics.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like LaMelo, when you look at his points in this game, most of them came in the final 2 quarters. Mark Williams, same thing. His impact as the game progressed, the impact progressed. He played all 12 minutes in the fourth quarter. 11 total points, 15 total rebounds. It felt like a quiet 15 rebounds because I feel like him and Gafford were kind of battling down there on the block, and Washington's not a really good rebounding team. Gafford, especially, I don't consider him like an amazing center that
This is
rebounds.
like an anomaly. I think he had like 15 plus rebounds or something.
Yeah.
Like that's not normally what he does.
So, yeah, it just felt like he was neutralized on the court for most of the game, but he did make some impact plays down the stretch. What are your thoughts on Mark Williams when it comes to, I don't know how to describe this. Like when he gets the ball down in the restricted area, he has the ball, a lot of pump fakes, and sometimes like he doesn't have the greatest like vertical explosion and maybe the awareness. And sometimes he gets blocked when I feel like, wow, like he's this massive guy that probably shouldn't. And I think the runway helps at times, like, getting a couple steps for an alley oop or a couple steps in
Hmm.
the pick and roll. That's fine. It's when he's down there on the block where he's pump faking and trying to be patient, which is fine to a certain extent, but then also because he doesn't have that like upward explosion all the time, it doesn't always lead to baskets at the rim.
Yeah, I've felt like this year I've really noticed it. It may have happened last year. Maybe last year I was so happy to have a center I didn't notice it. But this year I've noticed that on when it comes to the deep, really his game in general, he just doesn't have like the physicality you would want him to have. When he needs to have it, he has it. So I know it's there. Like like tonight, there was some like high point rebounds he had to get. He jumped up with one hand and like you said, exploded off the floor to get the board, and those were clutch boards. So it's like I know he can do it. It just seems as though it's something he turns on and off. Um, and I would like to see it more under the basket because, like you said, we kind of see it when he's going up for oops. And yes, he's getting a little bit of, like you said, a couple of steps in first. But I've seen enough of Mark Williams to know I feel like he can do it. I just wish I could understand why he doesn't. Because a lot of times he's really pretty good at drawing contact. We see Mark Williams get fouled a lot. I mean, he's a decent enough free throw shooter where I'm not minding. If he just keeps getting the ball and getting fouled, I'll take it. But he has the ability. I would like to see it more because I see it. It's not consistent enough, and I really can't quite put my finger on what it is. But I've seen it, so I've seen it multiple times. It's not like one of those things where you see every 20 games. It's like no, I see it 3 or 4 times a game. It's just I wish it was a little consistent, which is why we see him struggle against guys like Mitchell Robinson, Jalen Duren, because they kind of, like you said, neutralize. I like that word. They kind of neutralize him and kind of playing smaller than what he is. But then, like for example, the second game against the Wizards, he dominated Daniel
Yeah.
Gafford. Now, Daniel Gafford's the type of player where he's going to take that personally. Next game, he's going to try to play a little more physical, a little more trying to get under Mark's skin. And it seems like he did that, not get under Mark's skin, but just play. He was a lot more physical with him, and that kind of slowed Mark down a little bit. But it's just, I guess the best way for me to put it is I don't quite understand how Mark can be physical against other guys, but once they're physical back to him, his game is just it just kind of stops. I don't quite understand it, but he still manages to put up numbers. He still manages to be effective, so I can't really complain. But it's definitely something that I feel as though can be fixed. I just can't quite put my finger on what's causing it.
Yeah. And he finished 4 of 10 in the restricted area, which I don't that can't happen on a consistent
Right.
basis, obviously. That's just not a good enough percentage for a big guy like him. I guess one player that I just want to quickly mention before we get to the listener questions was Brandon Miller. Today was his birthday, correct?
Yeah, 21st birthday.
Did you hear his story about how he went from baseball to basketball?
Yeah, about the pants.
Like, I guess he got a growth spurt and he couldn't find pants that fit him in baseball, so he's like, "Okay, let me just go play some basketball." It's a very
I couldn't
odd.
imagine. I mean, in high school, that was like something when you get to like what do they call like the community pants? Like they just pass them down, and then like because I know they did that for mine. Like when I played football, they were just kind of like, oh, if we have the size, if not, make something work. So if I imagine growing to 6'8" or 6'9" or maybe even 6'7", I guess if we're talking high school, they probably were like, yeah, we don't have any pants for you.
But he finished with 15 points on his birthday, 0 rebounds, 3 assists. The only play that I really highlighted in my notes was there was a nice like steal and dunk and transition,
Mhm.
actually following a 3-point make on a following possession where he did an awesome job of shielding Kispert kind of with his arm and going up for that dunk. And that's a very veteran like calm move that he was doing. He wasn't rushing to get to the basket. He knew that he had
Mhm.
time and was able to finish there. All right. Listener question segment of the show. We actually got a question from you.
I didn't know I was gonna be on here.
Yeah, you're gonna be on here. You're gonna answer your own question, but I'm actually gonna pair it up with another question, which
Okay.
kind of go hand in hand. So you asked, can a veteran 3-and-D player help this team at least make the play-in, if they can kind of maintain play similar to the Celtics game? And then there's a guy at Chimney_buckets. What's the biggest problem with the defensive scheme or lack thereof? So you're asking about a 3-and-D player. This guy's asking about defensive scheme. I just pair these up here. So I
Okay.
personally think that the question that I think a lot of people ask themselves, how much of it when it comes to Hornets defense or anybody's defense, is it scheme versus personnel? Like, how much do you weigh those? Do you weigh heavier on the scheme and the coaching, or do you weigh it heavier on the personnel? I typically think that you have to have the personnel, and that plays a bigger role than the actual defensive scheme. But that's
That's
not
what
to
I was
say,
about to say.
yeah, it's not to say you don't need both. I mean, you need both,
Mhm.
but I think the personnel, and to your question, maybe acquiring a 3-and-D type player to try to solve two things at once would be a very good thing to do. So I think, Clifford is definitely preaching some of these things: effort, communication. But it's hard to know how much is getting through to the players. I also think the Hornets are somewhat limited in terms of how they can defend pick and rolls because of the fact that Mark Williams and Nick Richards are both drop centers. And so they're very susceptible to pick and pop bigs because, obviously one of the bigger downsides of playing the drop scheme is the fact that there's so much space to cover to contest those bigs like Gallinari or a Porzingis that will fade out to the 3-point line.
Mhm.
So there's personnel right there. So regardless of what you're doing there, you can switch it. You can try to hedge, but at some point you're putting players in a position where they're not going to be successful. It makes sense to play drop with Mark Williams. It makes sense to play drop. So Clifford is kind of tailoring his system to the personnel. Last thing I'll say before I pass it over to you about like the 3-and-D and just the defensive problems that we're seeing. We've seen some zone. We even saw zone tonight against the Wizards. I think the first possession that they ran it, Wizards hit a three. So Clifford's just trying anything.
Mhm.
But opponents are shooting 39% on above the break threes against the Hornets, which is the second highest in the NBA. And I think a lot of that goes to what I just talked about with the pick and pop bigs. Obviously, they're not all coming from, fives, but I think that's a weakness in Charlotte's defense. So, teams in general are just shooting a ton from distance, and that seems to be a problem with Charlotte. But yes, I do think that acquiring a 3-and-D guy would be very helpful for the Hornets. But I also say this, like I feel like the 3-and-D term is overused because I think some players who are billed as 3-and-D are either like they have the 3-point shot and then they have the potential to be a defensive player, or
Mhm.
they're like a very good defensive player and they have stretches where they hit threes, but they're not really a 3-point shooter. So it's hard
I
to find
agree.
those guys, I guess is what I'm saying.
No, I agree with that. Yeah, because like you said, it's usually one or the other. But the Hornets, I feel like we could, as long as we get somebody, or someone. I think let's put it this way: if I had to like kind of pick, because since we said it's one or the other, I would rather get a really good 3-point shooter
Uh-huh.
that is an aggressive defender or like just an active defender. So you don't have to. The stats doesn't have to say you're this amazing perimeter defender. But at least when I watch you, you're trying, you're closing out, you're not ball watching. Because I feel like another thing that we do a lot is ball watch.
Mhm.
Like I've went back and looked at games and saw where everybody's looking at the ball, and the four guys not guarding the ball handler has their little back turned to whoever they're guarding. So, yeah, I think that the scheme, it. I like the scheme. I actually like the scheme itself that Steve Clifford tries to run, like especially when we start doing like the blitzes on the ball handler. Um, my only thing with that is that when it works, which is kind of seldom, it looks really good in my opinion. But when it doesn't, it looks terrible. Like there's no in between. So wholeheartedly agree with your point of you got to have the certain personnel to run a certain scheme. And Steve Clifford's trying to find, because I think he realized like, okay, it's just not going to work until maybe we get some changes. Because at this point in our kind of Hornets rebuild, maybe outside of Mark Williams, just because I still call him a rookie, just because of the fact, and Brandon Miller, of course. I still call Mark Williams a rookie because he hasn't played 82 games yet. But everybody is basically who they are. There's not going to be like, oh, they're able to adapt their game and change it. It is at this point, everybody's kind of who they are, as far as the main guys. So like PJ, Terry, I think everybody's who they are. So we need to find ways to be able to use them correctly. But yeah, I think 3 and D type guy, or I really just want a guard to play defense, because what I'm seeing a lot is we'll have Brandon Miller guard guys like Drew Holiday. Brandon Miller was guarding Jordan Poole a couple of times. Jalen Brunson is a big one. And while I think he's decent at it, one, he's a rookie. Two, it's just that he doesn't quite have that foot speed yet. And also, mainly thinking of Jalen Brunson here, Jalen Brunson is an extremely like twitchy kind of guy. So it's not really easy for Brandon Miller to be on those guys. He does a decent enough job, but I think that's why I think it was key that whoever we get, if we get someone, is more of a veteran to kind of know the tricks and the trades of playing defense. They don't got to be excellent, but right now, Brandon Miller has the tools. It's just that he doesn't. He's only been in the league 14 games, 15 games. So I think that's kind of where I see it. Who and where and when, I have no idea. I personally don't think we're going to make a move this season, because it just
Yeah.
wouldn't make sense as far as the owner standpoint. You have a coach who may not be here next year, a GM who may not be here next year. No need to kind of overturn the roster without knowing, who your admins are going to be, essentially. So I doubt it will happen unless it's like a Isaiah Thomas type. But I can't think of any guy that is plays like 3 and D that is kind of like an Isaiah Thomas situation. So
Well, that segues into a question that I'm going to answer here in a second, but I want to know your thoughts on Mitch Kupchak and the whole situation about, this possibly being his last year. Do you think overall he's done a good job in his tenure? Like, where has he gone wrong? Where has he done, stuff that you were excited about? Like, what do you feel about this whole situation with the new owners, but also
mhm.
knowing that Mitch could be out the door?
I actually, contrary to popular belief, I actually like Mitch. I
Huh.
think my issue with him is he doesn't know how, in my opinion, he doesn't know how to pivot. I think he makes good quality decisions, but I think he stands on that too much. So he's I try to refrain from saying like he's afraid to admit when he's wrong, because it's not
Right.
quite that. But it's just the best way for me to put it is that in this year is one of those years. This is a playoff team. This is a playoff team. Like last year when Miles Bridges, we knew he wasn't going to play. They were still saying, "Oh no, this is easy. We can still make the playoffs." And everybody's like, "No, we cannot. If you're not going to, especially if you're not going to do anything." And then they were like, "Oh," and then they just waited too late. Like I think there was moves that could have been made to like, look, you knew and based on what we know now, you knew he wasn't coming back. So why did you not maybe trade Mason Plumlee earlier, or get a better deal? Because I know it was Mason Plumlee, but at the same time, it's like it could have got better than what we got. I think we ended up giving a draft pick to give him up, and so it like that. I'm still looking at Terry Rozier because I just never quite liked the fit with LaMelo Ball. Um, I know that's a lot easier said than done, but uh, like stuff, just certain things. The Gordon Hayward, I don't know who would have been willing to trade for him, but they were just more like, "Oh, we're just going to bring him back, and it'll be fine." And it's like, it just doesn't quite fit. We saw in the 43 and 39 season, the team actually played pretty well when Gordon Hayward got hurt. Because remember, in Lamelo's first year, they were like fourth seed for like the first 20 games. Then Gordon got hurt. Then the season just went down after that. The second season, he got hurt around the same time. They didn't get better per se, but like they were going like at the time they were maybe going like 6-4, 5-5 in 10 game stretches. This time with him gone, they were going like 7-3, 6-4. So I wouldn't say they got better, but it was like that. Okay, that was a time for you to maybe say, okay, maybe I need to focus on these guys. So I just think it took a long time for him to kind of make a decision. That's my only gripe with Mitch Kupchak, is that once he makes his decision, which I think he always has like the best inklings to make the decision, he doesn't know how to be like, okay, that was just wrong. Like the whole Cody Martin thing as well. I'm not sitting here going, I don't say go out here and bash the guy, but not saying anything, and it seems like maybe mishandling his injury is like, what are we doing? So
Well, this kind of leads to a quick question that which I'll just kind of wrap up on. At Chick Nicholson ask about GM candidates for future seasons, and if this is Mitch's last season, there was a report over the summertime where Jake Fisher said that there was Jeff Peterson has been linked to Charlotte, and if you're unaware, Peterson is currently the assistant GM with Brooklyn, and he's really young. I want to say like 33, 34 years old. So that probably could make some people a little bit wary of whether he's ready for this. But Brooklyn has collected some like young and promising talent over the years with Claxton and Cam Thomas. I guess it depends on how you feel about him. But they went out and acquired Mikal Bridges and Dorian Finney-Smith. But what I think is very interesting, if the Hornets were to make a shift in the GM, and obviously others positions would probably follow as well, there is a connection to Peterson and this new ownership group. Rick Schnall was a minority owner with the Hawks from 2015 until obviously this season. And Jeff Peterson, was a scout, an assistant GM with Atlanta from 2013 to 2019. So there's overlap there and a previous relationship. So when that report came out over the summer, I didn't really dig too deep into the guy's name, but I saw his name was floating out there. He was young. And then I looked at it, and there is some connection between him and Schnall. So that could be a potential a way to kind of make that connection, and maybe the relationship is going to be a seamless one as they transfer over, if that were to be the case. But yeah, I have mixed
Yeah.
emotions on Mitch. Go ahead.
I would like to know. I would like to hear your thought if we have time, just on your own Mitch, because like I said, I think he makes good decisions. I just think that he just takes too long to be like, okay, I made the wrong decision, or I could have made a better decision, and he just says a wait and see, and it's like we've already waited a little too late. So
Yeah, I, I'm kind of like you in the sense that like he doesn't want to admit that he's wrong, and so when you're telling the fans that this team has the capabilities of making the playoffs, and then when they don't, so what are you telling? What are you telling us? You didn't do a good job of evaluating your roster. Like you're telling us we're going to make the playoffs, but they didn't, and then you just keep blaming like the injuries, which obviously the Hornets have been very unfortunate with that thing, but every team goes through that.
it's
Very
almost
few.
gotten to the point where I don't even use. I can't. You can't even use injuries anymore because it's like so. Like that's what we do. It's like I can't keep blaming injuries forever, even though it is like you said a big part.
And there has been some drafting misses. Obviously, the Kai Jones, James Booknight draft was not a good one. And LaMelo kind of just fell in his lap. It's not like he had a decision to make. It was either going to be whoever fell to him, Wiseman or Ball. So, but yeah, there are some like I don't know. I'm kind of like you. I'm iffy on him. I'm probably not as high as on him as you are, but I would not be opposed to a change. And I think the
No,
owners are
no.
probably thinking that way anyway. Like they feel like, okay, if this isn't going to go the way that Mitch had planned and making the playoffs, which it's a very slim chance at this point. Yeah, I think change is probably needed, and get a young guy in here like Peterson from Brooklyn.
Yeah,
So
and if he's had anything to do with a lot of the decisions Brooklyn has made in the last couple of years, I think they got out of that KD, James Harden, Kyrie situation almost as best as you could at that point. You had three guys who maybe except KD's value were declining, and it was known that they didn't want to be with in Brooklyn. I think you got out of that as best as you could with that information being so public, with everybody kind of knowing that you were probably selling. I think they got out as, like I said, best as they could. They got some first round picks back. They got Mikal Bridges. They got some pieces here and there. Sign Lonnie Walker. You might can flip him at some point because he's playing fantastic. So if he had anything to do with that, then I'm all for it.
yeah, you wonder how much like the assistant GM plays a role in some of these moves. But last comment here in YouTube, which I think is an interesting one. Mitch will be remembered for taking Brandon Miller over Scoot, and as of right now, yeah, that's the better move. It's hard to judge these things, 10%, into the first season. So we'll see how that plays out a couple years down the road. But Darian, go ahead and let our listeners know. Obviously, they've listened to you before, but go ahead and let our listeners know where they can find you and your YouTube channel.
Oh yeah, Trust the Buzz on YouTube. Just Trust the Buzz. And then also Truzzbuzz on Twitter, TruzzBuzz. I just do Charlotte Hornets content. I do like kind of podcasty type, but then sometimes I'll do like more video type videos, for lack of a better word, where it's a little more editing, a little more film breakdown. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check it out. I love being here. Thank you for inviting me. I'll be on here anytime you ask me to. I really enjoy
Yeah, you're almost like an honorary like co-host at this point, a little fill-in. So
it.
I I know the Wednesday before Thanksgiving is probably not an episode that a lot of eyes or ears get on, and I'm sure people are traveling and stuff like that. But I was like, I got some time tonight. Let me go ahead and record this and stay up for a game in which the Hornets were disappointing for most of the game, but ended up pulling it out. So I appreciate everyone for tuning in, and as always, go ahead and tell a friend about our podcast, share our episodes with them, retweet us on Twitter, review us on Apple Podcast and Spotify, or wherever you listen to our podcast. So for Darian, I'm Richie.